for having me. My name is Suk Chai. I am a designer by trade. I've been in this business for about 25 years or so. Dating myself here. So how I got into fashion is I didn't know I was actually going to be a fashion designer until I was like senior year in high school. I always liked art. I always liked making stuff. I've always liked making paper dolls when I was a kid in Korea. But when I came to the States with my family, and you just go through the day-to-day, trying to learn English and trying to make friends, and trying to broken English at the time, you kind of don't know. And I was helping my mom, her little grocery store, so I would help her with her accounting. I thought I was going to be like an accountant or something, which is a horrible idea. And I know that because I'm so bad at math or finance by any means. My husband will attest to that. But I've always loved art. I've always gotten art awards when I was a little kid. I've always loved going to the mall and just kind of researching fashion, and TJ Maxx was opening up, but at that time, oops, I'm sorry, that's me. Sorry, that's really rude. Stop it. And I would actually go to every outlet stores, every mall, every Friday week in the afternoons, and when I was in middle school, and I would actually just go and research what's out there. And not because I wanted to buy anything or design anything, it was just curious. So that's kind of like how I got into wanting to be in this industry. But until maybe junior or senior in high school, I really didn't know that. So in high school, I'm thinking, what am I going to major in? Like, obviously, I'm really not that great at math, so I better start something else. So I immediately built up my portfolio for Parsons and FIT, and I got into both. And FIT was cheaper school to go to, so I decided to go to FIT. So FIT, I went there. I graduated with honors, and actually, Adrian Vidini at the time. Again, I'm dating myself. Adrian Vidini was a big brand back then. It's like Michael Kors of the day, and she was actually the judge of the art group, and I won the award for the Critics Award at FIT. So I graduated. I became an intern at Adrian Vidini, which happened to be actually at the same building as Liz Claiborne. And again, Liz Claiborne was one of the biggest companies in the States. Yeah. Huge. One of the biggest, really. And I worked there as an assistant designer for about a couple of years, working with Italian fabrics, models, merchants, and etc. Built their line sheets and all of that stuff, computer drawings. That was very first time when, literally first, it was called Corel. There was no Adobe. It was called Corel drawings. I was really great at that. And Adobe came, I'm like, crap, I'm bad at it. So I don't do that. But I used to do computer designs and CADing things up and patterns and all of that stuff. And I would also be the liaison between design to production. So I would understand what button goes with what pattern goes with what, and what factory needs what, and kind of arranging all of that stuff. So I was able to not only be part of the development process of it, but also work with the designers, but also work with production house as well. So at the time, when it was so big, it was $350 million business at the time. Dina Buckman actually had their own crew of sample makers in their own house, and the chief maestro was the Italian tailor. I learned so much from him. I would be in the fitting every single day with him, and we fit Missy, petite, and large sizes, and I would book the models. I mean, I went through every single process of what a fashion industry actually does, and really understand how to book fabric and how to book this and that, and really see through the entire process. So I learned a lot from that. But 2 years in New York in the industry kind of drains you out a little bit. I was a single mom already back then, and also literally living, every day by day, really. And I eventually kind of got ill, so I came back home to Seattle. I took a little bit of break, and I applied to Nordstrom. Nordstrom Product Group was actually just building up. Until that point, they were literally buyers were just going out and shopping and then literally knocking things off and just sending it to China and then knocking things off. I came in at the time when they were actually looking for designers who has experience. And one of the experiences that they were looking for as a designer is someone from Dana Buckman. So I kind of fell into that place where, so I always had this idea of really working with beautiful tailored fabrications. I've always loved Italian fabrics, and that's kind of like one of my biggest loves in the world. And there's really nothing like it. So I've really loved finding fabrics for Nordstrom, and I was one of the ones to actually bring in Italian fabrics to Nordstrom product group, because I was one of the first ones actually to be entered into the product group category or designer, as you know, if you will. So that was back in '97. I don't know, maybe some of you were not even born then, but yeah, '97 was great, and we built a lot of products. And year 2000, I don't know if you guys remember, but year 2000 was when the whole millennia happened, and then the whole orange walls happened, and the pillars, and the Reinvent Yourself campaign happened, and kind of went downhill from there. So my division, which I was always working for the Bridge division, which had the most tailored fabrics and biggest collections and highest price points. I helped to launch that line. I relaunched that line. We had a whole new label, new logo. We had a huge party with it. We actually launched in Japan. I've also visited Japan to help them with the retail side and all of these directions. So it was an incredible learning. And you know, of course, every business has its ups and downs, and strategies change, and people come and go. But we always kept that idea of Bridge label, Bridge price point, Bridge quality, great quality at a price. Because when you're doing private label, the margin is much smaller for your store, but your quality is higher, so people come back. There are a lot of stories I've heard that people go to Macy's or Barney's or is asking for this particular brand that only sold at Nordstrom. So that was a big pride on us, because we never marketed ourselves at all. Private label, we never did. And so that was kind of like our own secret little powerhouse that we had. And I worked that brand for about 14 years. So Classic Santé is one of them. I helped to launch Valette, Nordstrom Collection, Tesori, I think it was called, which was a little bit higher brand, only Italian fabrications. And it was such a great time because not only I had learned to actually launch programs and launch labels, but it was a full-on collection. I actually got to work with merchandisers, work with mills directly, find and sourcing, go to the factories, work with factory seafoods, they call them in China, which is masters of their own art. Work with them on fitting, corrections, and production. I work with production planners on how to plan this right so that your margins are right. Also responsible for some of the margins and the business results. Is it selling, is it not selling? I'm in the meetings every single day looking at what we call hots and dogs. Hot, sold well, dogs if you're like in the doghouse. So there were times where we had a lot of dogs, and there were times when we had just the hots. And I kind of left at 14 years after I joined the company. I left when we had a lot of hots. So it was a really good time. But it was such a great time. I had an amazing team. I've learned so much. We had buy meetings after buy meetings, and 6 buy meetings a year per brand, which times 4, because I ran four brands. And each brand, Classic Santé had the most, of course, but at one of its highest, when I was handling leather program alone, this is even before I was design director, and there was a time when we had 250 just leather jacket samples. And that's just a fraction of the entire collection. And eventually I took on the entire collection. I started as a woven designer, took on leather, took on outerwear, took on dresses, in every category, and then eventually sweaters. I got to learn how to make sweaters, what knitting machines look like, how they actually work. So I got to learn all of that technicalities and work with the factories as well. So it was, for me, it was one of the blessing in disguise that I fell into this perfect timing in the industry. Although there's ups and downs, I fell into this place where I learned so much. And of course, you kind of have to persevere through a lot of boredom too at the same time. It's crazy, but it's boring at the same time because you don't feel creative, because you're always designing or doing something just for that brand, and it doesn't really say you. So one of the interesting thing is, every time if I like something myself, I need to edit it, because it will never sell on the floor. It's not for the Nordstrom customer. So I knew that by heart after a while, because when you first go become a designer, you're like, oh, but that's my design, like they want to change it. People become very personalized with it, and they take it very personally, and that's definitely not what you should be doing as a designer for somebody else's brand. So,
so
I've learned very quickly that it's business. There's no, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's nothing personal. You might be the most creative person, or you might be the most hardworking person, but it's not about that. It's really about, is it going to sell, and did it sell? And so I learned that very quickly, and I was able to kind of get to the highest of it all. Like we sold really well, and I left at 5-year high even after the 2008 economy fall. So that was really, really great experience. So I left Nordstrom as a senior design director running 4 brands. I left Nordstrom in 2011, and I decided to not deal anything with fashion because I was kind of burnt out, and I was really juiced out. So I said, I'm gonna get married, get a puppy, renovate, go dig some weed out in the backyard. So I did that for like a year. And then eventually, what brought me back to the industry is I went to Barney's, New York before they renovated recently. Back in the day, they used to have Lanvin and Dries Van Noten back in the first, the mezzanine floor. Now they only have cosmetics. Right under the stairs, there was Lanvin and Dries Van Noten. And you would always go there, straight back, as soon as I enter, and I touched a coat. And as I talk about it, I say this to many people who know me, I shiver, and I almost cry. I had goosebumps all over my body. My heart was racing out of my body, and I had tears in my eyes. And I was literally touching it, and I'm like, I need to get back. Literally, this is the Italian cashmere, like, I need you. So that was a moment that I like, if I don't do this again, I will die because I can't breathe anymore. And I suggest that don't ever get into business with that mindset because that's not really the healthiest mindset to go into a business for. But that's how I got myself kicked back into this industry. I was really, really burnt out from it, but that was that moment. That passion brought me back, and I knew without being here and without being in this creative, textile driven and this nurturing my own senses, if I didn't do that anymore, I would die. It's like it would be better if I were dead. So I started my own line, as well as I also started doing my consulting. So my line is called SCHAI. It's about 5.5 years old now. And some people ask me, where does the inspiration come from? A lot of people say, this is very interesting because, ironically, when I was at Nordstrom, as a design director, you would build mood stories after inspiration boards, talk about 6 different brand meetings times 4. You have to do that 24 times a year for 14 years. Okay, so I was done putting mood boards together. I'm like, I don't really care. I'm not going to show you what my mood is. So at the end of the day, my inspiration really comes from my own experience or my own thoughts. So, for example, Salt is my very first collection. It was an image that my son had taken in his microscope. It was salt crystal with a hydrogen peroxide. And for some reason at that moment, it really resonated with me because the salt felt like the sharpness of the salt itself felt like me at heart. Like I was sharp and I'm like, I'm going to do this, and like, don't touch me. And whereas like there's this soft kind of water bubbles that's happening with the hydrogen peroxide, this unknown substance that's kind of breaking it apart. And that inspired me to find my lines, which is angular lines, but then there's a softness of the texture and kind of creating that beautiful harmony in its own. So if you see that, if you like, when you look at it, you won't really understand, but then when you look at my lines, you'll see, oh, I see it. You'll see certain lines that kind of resonates with that, and that actually continues all the way through all the 5 years of the collection. My second collection, for example, is called Salt because for whatever reason, I was just thinking about my father. My father was a fisherman. He was still alive then, and he just passed away a couple years ago. But for some reason, I was just thinking about him, and I remember fishing in Alaska, and just like this feeling of breeze and water just came back and over. So I had to call it something, and I called it water, because it was really about flow and breeze and that. But the strength of my father as a man who was, fighting the wind and the chills over there. So et cetera, et cetera. So Awakening is really an homage to my mom. Soul collection is more homage to myself as an artist. So Soul of an Artist. there is Legion. Legion is actually, this was a tough time in my head. It was a little bit of a tough time. That's fall 16, which, by the way, got recognized the most because it was also on New York Times Style magazine, featured by the editor. It was a huge ordeal. I didn't even use a PR person for that. It was like something that really rolled on its own, and it was such a great thing. And that really got me to a whole nother level. But that Legion really resonated to what was happening in the world, the political trauma that was happening in 2016, and just there was so much, the whole Syria thing was happening, and there was so much going on, and I just felt like, we need to kind of hold hands and be kind of together. So Legion is really being about your own army, your own team, kind of uniting together and holding on to each other. So there you'll see long ties that kind of resonates to holding onto each other, and eventually when you hold all those ties, it's a full circle. So that's kind of like, I have to explain through all of these things, but you'll see the little details that kind of goes back to that. And then Monsoon is my last collection that I've created. Monsoon is a huge rainstorm in Asia, and for some reason, before I launched this collection, I had this feeling of really heavy shoulder and this huge weight on my shoulder. And I think part of it is because I was 3 years into the business. I need to make it happen. Like, I was like pressuring myself to, like, I need to get big, I need to be famous, da 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 da, and I need to sell a lot. And I was pressuring myself a lot. And I think that was kind of the pressure. And as soon as I drew all my sketches, that kind of went away. So I felt like that was like it's not the monsoon itself, it was the light after a monsoon. So huge weight or huge cloud, rain cloud, kind of lifted off. So that's kind of, so it's, the inspirations of my collection are kind of more emotional, very personal, but it has a lot of story to it. So I would suggest that you do read some of the stories. They're actually written here on the, so usually in the inspiration pictures here, and then the stories are written the first preface. These are actually written by Laura Cassidy. I'm sure many of you know she is she was the Seattle Met magazine's editor, and also I think Seattle Met Bride and Groom magazine. And then she went off to work with Olivia Kim at Nordstrom for 3 years, doing their space and designer creative division. And then she left, and she's now working on, I believe she has her own working creative business going on. Aside from, she also works with Russell Wilson and Ciara on their platform as well, so social media and creative platform. So I got very lucky to meet her from very first collection. She agreed to write my stories every single time. So, nice. So I was like really, like I feel very lucky and very blessed to have those people around my community, and she loves my collection enough to share her ability to really express my inspiration in the words that she does, and it's just so beautifully written, and so for some reason she just brings my emotions out in such a beautiful way. So I would suggest that you take a look at those as well. As for now, people have been asking me, what are you doing? What's your new collection look like? Right now, I'm taking a little bit of a break from hiatus from creating new collection after collection. I got a little sick, and then my father passed away recently, and a lot of changes happened in my life, and I felt like I needed a little bit of calm and more control over my life, and so I decided I was going to do a little bit more consulting, which I've been ignoring. I've been ignoring a lot of the network and community while I was doing chasing after my line. I never went to lunch with my friends anymore. I never did that. I'm like, what am I doing? I need to really nurture myself and my own community. So I decided from last year, meet new friends, go to places, and just be inspired and just fulfill fulfill myself. And so I've been doing some consulting work, creative consulting with KC, and also I have a client in Texas on their product apparel. I'm welcome to take in one more. But I also do some lectures at schools. So I've been going to Seattle, sometimes Seattle Central, sometimes Seattle Pacific University. I do lectures at least once a semester. I also teach fashion illustrations on the side, kind of various steps of all fashion as a designer as well as a business owner in fashion. So I think that's about it.
That's a lot.
Fun fact.
Yeah.
My very first fashion job, behind the scenes job, was to dress Tyra Banks.
Wow.
Before she was famous.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's very interesting.
That's pretty cool.
It was for dressing Tracy Reese's collection before she became famous too. I'm dating myself again. But yeah, that's my fun fact.
Oh, but it sounds, looks like you are. I was going to ask you about your junior card still.
I do, and I don't do it consistently. I like to do these cards, these greeting cards, and they're hand drawn, and I sell them. They are sold, and they're 100% of the proceeds will go to a nonprofit. Usually every year I choose a different nonprofit. So we will see this year, but I haven't really been building on that yet. So I'm like, but I do teach fashion illustration, and that's one of the examples.
You're very talented.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Very talented.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So
Great.
will you be back? Do you have plans to come back? At any?
Well, actually, I never really stopped.
You're still
I-
selling.
I am still selling. I do talk shows. I do pop-ups. I decided I wasn't going to chase after wholesale business. I wasn't going to chase after market weeks, which is defined for you.
Yeah.
I wanted to define my own timeline. I wanted to define my own ability to be connected to my clients. So I like to connect to each client myself. So I do a lot of trunk shows. I do personal private appointments at my home studio. I take my stuff, like Trina Turk did, but she went to go find showrooms. I actually take my stuff to Salt Lake City, Kansas City. I mean, I have some customer base who welcome me there to sell my stuff. So I do that as well. And of course,
Yeah. Nice. Great.
yes.
First of all, I want to say that I admire your ability to recognize and understand that I just need to stop and step away and think. I really like it. Not a lot of people can do it, and not a lot of people do that when they should. So this is great. This is amazing. But you're clearly very ambitious. What's your ultimate goal? When are you gonna say, okay, I'm stopping. This is where I wanted to be, and I'm here. And
It's very interesting because I've always wanted to be creative, but thank you for saying the fact that I actually recognize my time, and it was a very difficult decision for sure. Very personal too, but I realized my sanity is the most important. My relationship with my husband was very important, and keeping my family and keeping the norms, which I never had, was very important. And I actually finally grew up. I finally matured, and I realized that was more important than chasing after not just a dream, but it was more like just more product. And so my concept of creating is really create as a need. Create it when it's needed by somebody or somebody want it. It's not like just produce. And that's like, I was doing my own little fast fashion on my own, although I was making a few pieces at a time. I didn't want to do that to myself because that was one of the things I hated about being in the big corporate. I was chasing after, 24 collections a year, and like I was in meetings all the time. I was never creating. I was draining, and I was building on my own line and my own business, and I was doing it to myself. I chose to do it to myself, whereas I was getting paid to do so. So to me, that was kind of like, okay, I need to look at myself, and and now that I've done that, now that I've chased my dreams and I've designed, and I don't have that like burning desire to like have to create. I want to be in creative environment. I want to be impactful to my clients and my creativity. I want to expand that to another area. So I've been involving myself into doing photo shoots and styling as well, and art direction, which I've always wanted to do. So that's kind of where my passion and ambition is going. Back in the day, I always wanted to own like a shop like Tutkayo or Colette, which is no longer there anymore in
Paris.
I always wanted to have lifestyle store with a restaurant, a cafe, and a art book, and that like probably won't make any money off of it, but I mean, yeah, that was actually a dream in really a cloud. But right now, my ambition is to really be able to help people creatively to really reach their vision, or make it even better than what they thought it could be. Whatever it could be. It could be, you know, visual presentation. It could be actual product making. So I do help design as well as spec and fit and whatnot, and select fabrics and things like that. But that's kind of like, I feel very empowered and rewarded when I do something and then they feel good about it, and that's kind of where I'm going. I think that's where my ambitions are going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Suk, I want to say I applaud you for also giving back to the fashion community in Seattle.
Yes.
You are a great mentor from what I've heard from a lot of people.
Yes.
And you're doing all these other things within the colleges, so my hat's off to you. Good
Oh,
job.
And yes, I'm a member. You didn't know. Yes.
It's easy with hindsight 2020, and you go, okay, if I'd only known 10 years ago what I know now, it would have made things so much simpler for you. For starting your own business and for the designers around here, what would you say is kind of the 2 or 3 things that you learned along the way that you wish somebody had shared with you early on?
I think probably how much money it takes. People talk about blood, sweat, and tears, but they don't tell you how much money it will take. And I can be very, when I do some lectures at schools, I'll tell them, just whatever the number you're thinking, multiply it by 3, minimum. That's why people are like, you're lucky if you can keep it at the 3. You know, but that's the reality. Nobody told me that. And so when that reality hits, and the 3 is because you have pretty much in 1 year, minimum 3 seasons you're going through if you're chasing out the market the way the market schedules are. So I kind of knew that going in because I've launched many brands and all of that stuff. I knew a lot of the processes. I'm thinking like, I kind of know a lot of this stuff. But actually going out to market yourself, market your brand, that's a whole nother business ability. Or a different talent. You know, you could be creative as you want, but you might not want to stand in front of people. I had to learn to be like that. And thank God at Nordstrom, I had to sell to my buyers. We had 24 buy meetings a year. So I'd be like in front of buyers, Nordstrom, their own private label buyers. And I would sell to them. And I got to know them very well. I understood how to communicate with them. Even then, trying to do it with your own line versus a company's back,
And cold calling.
Yeah, it's just like, I hate calling people. That's what, like, I don't even call my husband. I'm serious. Like, we don't talk on the phone at all. We just text. Like, even if I'm on an international trip, like, we would never. And then I have to call for a credit card number or this and like that. I hyperventilate. So those are things that people don't tell you, and people are like, oh, I'll get somebody to deal with my business. No. When you're starting your own thing, that's a whole lot of money that's going to another person that you have to pay to do. And they may not have the passion for your brand as you do, and why you have to convince them. Because at the end of the day, you as a designer, you're the creator, you have the most passion and you understand the brand the most. And what's really, what I'm greatly grateful for is, although my collection has been in very small number of stores, every single store, the buyer loved me. And a lot of times they're like, oh, your product is so, I can't afford it, but I love you and I love it, so I'm gonna just get this one. Is that okay if I just give you like 3 order, you know? Yeah. I'm like, do it. You know, I just wanna see how it does. And eventually some will take it, and eventually some will just, I just can't afford you anymore. But they still love me as a person, and I think part of it is relationship, learning how, like, nobody can tell you that, and being authentic to who you are, but also being able to understand how you present yourself and how you behave in whatever capacity. I mean, look, 15 years, like now you're here, you guys all worked together many, many years ago, and now you're still friends. I think part of it is, it's still a relationship-driven and very emotional business, and we forget that because it's fast fashion or it's fashion, and we just think that it's internet, fast and running, and trendy, blah blah blah, and Instagram and blogger. No, at the end of the day, real business happens with connections, and that's one of the things that people don't tell you about. And that's why I would love to see like, you know, new members and younger members really like get it, you know, because that's really valuable. I realized at a very young age, behave yourself. That was a big deal. Even at Nordstrom, one of the things, you know, I mean, you know, living in a very small box of creativity, it could be very frustrating. And I promised myself I'm not going to throw a tantrum. I was promising myself that I'm going to leave it at a high note, the highest note I can possibly, so I do not have a bad reputation. Because this business is so small. And it's smaller and smaller, although the world is getting bigger, but it's getting actually smaller at the same time with this, you know, the whole social media, and everybody's connected. I really realized it's not even 6 degrees of separation, it's literally like 3. Yeah. And like sometimes even 1. My showroom, talk about Trina Turk, my showroom, I went to, the showroom that picked me up, one of my first collections, I found out I worked with her at Dana Buckman. She just happened to be on the marketing side, was working, and I'm like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I know this person. But I say that to so many people, like I don't really have a face and name, you know, connotation whatsoever. I remember what they wear typically. Like name and face is like, oh, it's always a blur. So I'm like, I think I know this person. We look so familiar. And we're like, wait, did you, like, where did you work? Da, da, da. Oh my God, we were at the same place at the same time. We just were totally different divisions, so we just kind of walked by each other, never really talked to each other, but we always walked by each other. And I mean, her dog's name was same as my dog, and so all these and so all these like little things that you connect, and you're like, oh, there's a connection, and those are valuable things. And although my showroom didn't do a whole lot for me, they did some better press for me. But my sales wasn't, you know, extravagant. You would think that you would get like every store in the world just because like you're paying arm and a leg, but they that's not true either. But I still keep good relationship with her because I know she's very, she's well connected. Whether she has good reputation or not, that's not my concern. I want to have good reputation with her. That's about me keeping my own. My sanity. I don't want people to talk badly about me. That's probably one of the more selfish thing. But at the end of the day, I think people really don't realize how these connections are so important, and that's really what carries your business forward eventually.
And I think it's the personal connection. It's not just a social media connection.
Absolutely.
It's a personal
No, it's a
connection.
personal connection.
And that's what being in a group like this helps with, is personal connections.
Yeah. And my customers too. Like my customers who can easily come to a trunk show, they'll rather come to my studio and just spend 2 hours and like, you know, strip and then try this and try that and then just do that in front of me, than having to go to a shop or something and having to feel like they need to dress up to go to a party or something like that. So rarely my clients actually come to trunk shows. They actually just make a private appointment. They'll just come like 9 in the morning or lunchtime actually. They'll like leave. I'm like, great. I love that because I get to really know her. We talk about holidays, we talk about, you know, cousins and nieces and whatever, you know, Easter and all that. So those are things really, to me, is very valuable. And some people love that, some people don't. I never, these type of things for me was like I always thought it was like, oh, it's like shallow talk. But when I get to know these people, I really love it, and they really love me taking my time to like dress them, and they're like, oh my God, the designer dressed me. You know, that's kind of like, I'm like, really? You were like, oh. So there's like always this synergy, and I think that's so important, and that's really what carries you forward. At the end of the day, you know, when I die, I'm not gonna bring my collection with me. I'm gonna die with my own, you know, energy, you know, leaving my energy down here, and so for me, that's a big thing. So I really like to see the younger designers or the next generation of designers or business owners to really think about that, and that's something definitely nobody teaches at school.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I have one quick one. You'd said you had a couple buyers that had said they loved your stuff but couldn't afford your prices. I'm sure you have a philosophy on pricing for you. I run into a lot of designers that don't understand how to do it for themselves. Could you give a quick little synopsis on how you
She can lecture on that.
What's that?
She can lecture on that.
I'm sure she could.
Book and Vivian.
Yeah, price. I mean, of course, you know, there's so many factors into pricing. There's obviously cost of goods in the raw materials itself, and to buttons, and where you're getting it, where you're sewing it, who's making it, and of course you want to pay yourself, but usually in the first, I don't know, several years, or at least couple years, you're definitely not paying yourself. So I would say, like, the first thing I tell everybody is, like, have a business plan. Why? Because one of the most stupidest mistake, or I don't know if that's a word, but the most stupid mistake I've done is I did not start my business with a business plan. I started with that touch of cashmere. I got to do this or I'll die. That's the moment I still started my business. So it was not something that I suggest people to do. And I did, considering that I didn't have a business plan to start with, I did pretty well. I feel like I did fairly well as to establishing my brand, establishing where I stand in the market, and I knew visually where it's going to go. But pricing was one thing, and like at the end of the day, everything became over $2,000 if I was trying to make money. But no, of course you can't sell that. So you go in knowing the price needs to be competitive, but also knowing that you won't be selling a whole lot, and you'll be in the red for minimum few seasons, and then plan forward. So therefore, I say, whether you have a price point in mind or not, start with a business plan, because you have a strategy for how many seasons, how many years down the road, and that's when you start to make some green. Then you know where you're headed. So, and I was doing actually fairly well by the time I said, I need to like calm it down. It wasn't because I wasn't doing well. Actually, I sold out of my last collection very quickly. I had to remake them, so I had to chase after remakes a lot and reorders, which also sold out. There was a store that had 4 reorders in Texas, Austin, and out of the blue, she's like, "Do you have more? Do you have more? Do you have more?" I'm like, "What are you doing? Eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Like you're wiping it like in the bathroom? I don't know what are you doing." But she had these customers just eating it up, and when you find that right boutique, it's like the most amazing. I also realized that it didn't require 200 shops for me. I just needed that handful of amazing boutiques that's perfect for me. And that's kind of where the business strategy, branding, all of that comes in. And of course pricing is also important. But I do have a client who's having a very difficulty trying to set her prices. I tell her it's just way too low for your bridge price point, but then she'll go to a showroom who's selling lower price points. It's like, oh, it's not, like, that's too expensive. But of course the showroom is going to tell them that. So you kind of have to, at the end of the day, when you have the branding straight, where you have the research done, you see who your sisters or your competitors are, you look at the demographics, and you do the research, and you have the plan right, it's going to sit there. And if your product is flooded out there, it's probably not a good product. So you have to look at the viability of that in the market. And that's a whole nother topic on its own. But pricing is really, at the end of the day, when you're going to, especially this particular business or particular design business or apparel design business, you're going in knowing that you're going to be in the red for a minimum couple of years, and that needs to be planned out. So, and people are like, really? Oh yeah.
Last year, the mentorship program, Sue Dickerson-Smith, an FGI member, did a really great talk at one of our lectures about pricing and about planning, and planning that you're going to be in the red because you have to plan that you have your first production and you have to pay for that and sell that, and you're waiting for that money to come in while you're already making your next collection and funding that. So, and most stores, or I don't know if you know this or if it works like this with some of the smaller stores, but most stores, if you're working with bigger stores, they're 30 to 60 days before they pay you.
Yes. If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
And some of them have riders like, well, if your bill comes in at the end of the month, then we'll take 45 days. Because we roll it into the next month. So they do all this funny stuff. So there's, yeah. Oh yeah, all the benefits.
Well, they will pay. They will pay.
When they pay.
And like you work with the majors, they have schedules.
Yeah.
We pay on this Tuesday, we want 45 terms,
Yeah.
all kinds of, so you need to do all that up front.
Yeah.
Not to basically one of the things that I see from yours is you've established a quality level of what you want your product to be. And when you're pricing your stuff, you've got to factor that in. You're not wanting to be fast fashion. You want a certain level of quality and affordableness to go with it. And I think that's one of the things that designers kind of go, okay, I want to do this, but they don't know where to.
Yeah, but
And I think the business plan
Yeah.
is what they,
Right.
like you said, the business plan is actually
engineer your
crucial.
costs. So
Yeah.
basically, you want to do backwards. I'm going to be at a $500 dress. I'm going to be at, here's my competition. Here's the stores I'm going to set in. That's where you have to start if you're smart.
Yeah.
And then
And that's exactly
you do,
what
that's
Sue
what
talked
you're right.
about.
Yeah.
But there's so many people that I run into, it's like, oh, I want to go out and do. I'm like, okay, great. And I'm hearing they're making like a profit margin of like 20%. It's like, you'll never make any money if you're not charging more. And
Interesting
they
thing
don't know how
about
to do it.
the whole costing too is like everybody's like, I want to do it local, I want to do it, I want to make it in USA. Da, 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 da.
They need you to be an FGI member and be in the mentorship program. There you go. Get the skill set necessary to know what to do.
Or at least to know what to expect.
What not,
What not to do.
Yeah,
What not to
what
do.
not to do.
Yeah.
That's a good one. What not to do.
Yes.
That's probably the biggest one.
I mean,
So-
although I knew a lot of these things and I had a lot of the plan in my head, I never really wrote it down. But I followed a lot of my plan. Of course, you have to adjust a little bit as you go, but there's so much you learn. And shipping is a whole other thing. Shipping is a freaking black hole. Oh yeah, the customs codes, the duty rate. Like all of a sudden you get this FedEx bill. You're like, where did this $900 come from? You're like, oh, it's duty great on my $500 fabric. I got to pay $900. You're like, what the hell? So these are things. Yes, I kind of knew about it because I had to deal with the customs department and duty department at Nordstrom. So I knew about these things, but I didn't know exactly what like dollar value every single one of them costed. Because even Nordstrom has a great rate for FedEx, great rate for importing.
Yeah.
They have the brokers and all that stuff. I can't afford a broker like for a couple of rolls of fabric. So that's a whole another gamut of, I call them just black hole. Like you just need to have a budget for this black hole. It's a beautiful black hole, you know, that you can't see, but it'll be there. You know?
It'll be sucking a lot of money out of your pocket.
It really is like that. It's like gravity pulling, and you're like, what the heck? So when people say, I want to make it here, I want to make it with Italian fabrics, so then I'm like, good luck. But here's my experience. So if you're willing to listen, actually take my advice, you would have probably actually acted upon it. But there are a lot of people who are told, oh, you're so talented, you're so amazing, da, 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 da. They hear just this, and they go, okay, I'm going to make this one thing for this person, one thing that person, and they get frustrated that they're not getting their money's worth and their hours worth. And that's not how you do your business. That's just being just an artist at the end of the day. And yes, fashion designers are artists, but also if you don't have a business, you really design. It has to have a marketability at the end of the day, commercial ability. So that's to me is like a big learning that a lot of designers from school, they don't really learn about this reality factor because that's not what they're taught. Because at school, you're told to be creative, do the most amazing thing in the world, and that's what you show as you graduate. But the reality hits, you're like, whoa! So I told a lot of people, although I went to FIT, one of the most rigorous schools in the world, one of the top technical schools in the world. You're crying. You're all day, every day. You're never sleeping. You're always worried, and you get out. After you graduate, and you go into the industry. 2 months, you're like, this is so much more than the years of school that I had. That's like the reality that hits you when you're actually in the industry. So, so that's kind of the things I'm like. I kind of want to smack some students' heads. Some people are like, it's like reality is much more difficult. And that's kind of thing goes back to the planning and the whole costing. All of that stuff is part of trying to be realistic as well. And so for my own reality and my own sanity's sake, I decided to do more consulting and helping and applying my creativity to help the other brands. And I also decided I don't need to make more stuff for myself, like my own line. That's kind of greedy in a way. And part of sustainability, I take it as, yes, make it in, actually, by the way, I make everything in New York City, all the Italian fabrics. little plug-in. But no, I do that, but then I realized like I don't need to do so much of that either. I like to try to keep as much, domestic resources as possible, but it comes with a cost and comes with its own headaches as well. And I've learned that, and I actually try to coach people through that as well. Because, yes, you can easily go to China, and a lot of times Chinese factories will pretty much handle everything. They'll order the fabric for you, they'll order the shrimp for you, it's all packaged deal, so much easier. But there's also risks to that too. I know a lot of great factories who are out of states that are amazing, but at the same time, you probably have to order like minimum 200 units per style, and are you willing to take that on just for it has a lower cost? And then there's duty and shipping, which I can't tell you how much that percentage is going to be. So there's a lot of factors that people don't think about, like, oh, I'll make it in China. Okay, sure, But yeah, that definitely comes with some planning and really investigating and researching to see what is most viable for your brand. So one of the things I suggest to people to do is like, don't rush. Because once you launch, you can't stop. You can't skip seasons because buyers are going to watch you. If you're trying to sell to buyers, people are going to watch you to see what new things are coming up until they feel like, oh, this is my brand, I'm going to buy it. So until then, you have to keep on going. So you can't not have a plan for that. You have to have a very, very strong brand identity, first of all, but also you have to build a business plan and strategy around that to make sure that it carries on at least several seasons down the road, so that you have a consistency and a presentation ability that shows that this is an evolution of my collection. People need to see that. You owe it to the customers to give that, so that they can really trust you. So part of it is also delivering your goods as well. But anyway, I could go on and on about this event a lot, but yeah. So that's where I am at this point. I have my cards here for my collection. And my consulting, Mold Legion is my consulting studio. So if you want to take one, these books are not to go, but the cards you can take.
Well, so thank you
Thank
so much. We learned a lot.